and welcome back to the Beer Ladies podcast. My name's Erica, and I'll be your host today. And I'm joined today by three co-hosts, Bean, Lisa, and Carolyn. And before I introduce them, just a reminder that we're on YouTube as well as all the podcatchers, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. And if you could like, rate, subscribe, share. We are on Twitter at Beer Ladies Pod, and our new updated handle on Instagram is also at Beer Ladies Pod. And you can also find us on Facebook. So please share this with a friend, and let's meet today's co-hosts. So if everyone could say hello.
Hey.
Hi. How's everyone doing?
Not so bad. Not so bad.
So let's all grab our drinks and get started. Today's topic is all about pumpkin beers. You may have noticed a trend in Ireland, the US, and many other countries. Lots of flavors such as pumpkin pies, breads, donuts, scones, coffees, bagels, cupcakes, etc., etc. These can be natural or artificial flavors, and we're going to share with you what we're drinking. So why don't we start with Bean?
Oh, well, I don't know if anyone else has the Salan Pumpkin Ale from White Hag, but that's what's in my glass today. And 6.2%, and it's in amongst those White Hag offerings that do have some lactose and bit of sugar in amongst the cinnamon and hops and ginger and nutmeg and barley. And that can be a little bit polarizing sometimes, the lactose, but it's muted and it's beautiful color. Mm-hmm. Don't know if anybody else has the Samhain ale, but that was the pumpkiniest thing that I could find without going very far.
I actually had a can of that before we started recording, and it was really lovely. And I want to applaud you on your pronunciation of Samhain. A lot of people mispronounce that word. It's really tricky to spell as well. So it's an Irish word. And how about you, Lisa?
So I have the Trouble Brewing pumpkin brew. So I think we'll get into it a little bit later, but there really are only two for the most part when it comes to pumpkin beers in Ireland. So there's the Trouble one and there's the White Hag one. I'm sure there are one-offs by other breweries from time to time, but this is my second or third can that I've had this year. Really, really happy with how it's turned out this year. It's not quite as strong as the White Hag one. It's 4.5%, but definitely a very mellow kind of beer. It is made with pumpkins in the mash, which not all pumpkin beers are, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it does still have some of those kind of autumnal spices, but they're really, they're really mellow. There's nothing overpowering, and it's really nicely balanced. So the lads at Trouble did well this year. So good job, guys.
And I also have the Trouble one in
lovely.
Its own glass. Now, Carolyn, what about you?
I have two. I have the Shipyard Pumpkin Wheat Ale, and then I have the Harpoon Dunkin Pumpkin. So they're both very different. They're both very different in color. One's lighter and one's darker. So yeah, we'll try them and see which one I like better.
Very good. I'm impressed that we all found pumpkin beers for today. So to kick us off, I'd like to give Lisa the floor, and she's going to discuss the history of using pumpkins and turnips in Halloween in Ireland and perhaps some other countries as well.
Sure, thanks. So it's an interesting one because there are a lot of myths built up around it, and there are some things that aren't quite true, but then other things we kind of like to be true as well. So before I get into kind of pumpkins, I'll circle back first to sort of Samhain, sort of Celtic Harvest Festival type things, All Hallows Eve, and All Hallows Tide, because there's a couple of different things here that get wrapped up together. And I think I'm going to have to do one little bit of myth debunking straight up, which is, it's so much fun. And I love the phrase, but you'll hear this time of year that the veil between worlds is at its thinnest, and it's all very sort of spooky and spiritual and all that kind of thing. But unfortunately, there's no great antiquity for that phrase. It first pops up in a related context in sort of 19th century spiritualism. But when we're talking about it being related to Halloween specifically, it's only from the 1970s. So alas, no great antiquity for this. There's also not a lot of evidence that there is, again, continuity between what may or may not have gone on for Samhain and then what we have kind of for Halloween. But that said, there are a lot of things tied up with Halloween, and we'll get to the bit about the turnips and the pumpkins that do have, we'll say, deeper origins that we can actually have good evidence for. So there are certainly things like souling in the medieval period. So you would make soul cakes, you would go from house to house singing souling songs, or going around your village. This we do have good evidence for, especially in both Ireland and especially the north of England, but other parts as well, and as well as the west of England in Cornwall, but other places as well. There are also analogs in Italy, a little bit in Spain too, although very, very different climates, of course. But a lot of what we do have that we can see some kind of continuity for, and I'm not going to say permanent, real sort of definitive, if you like, continuity, is really kind of 16th century, maybe even 15th century, possibly a little bit older. But a lot of these things get sort of revived, or the traditions kind of lock in sort of late 18th, early 19th centuries. And a lot of this gets exported from Ireland to North America. So that's how it kind of ends up snowballing. But I'll sort of circle back. I could go on and on about this for a long time, but I'll stick to the brief. The bit with turnips and pumpkins is we do have, there are folktales, especially in Ireland, about people like Stingy Jack, and he sort of evolves into this jack-o'-lantern type character. But it's also sort of practical. People are going out at night, especially if you're going souling. You want to carry a light with you. So they would have carved a turnip, and, put a tallow candle in it. And, turnip is not necessarily huge. And so when people did start getting pumpkins from North America, or conversely going to North America and finding pumpkins there, if they had, been immigrants, they're like, these are easier to carve. They're much bigger. They were arguably delicious or not, depending on your point of view. But it's really, turnips from kind of, we'll say, the 16th-ish century onward. And even now, there are people who will carve turnips instead of pumpkins as a kind of point of pride, which is fair, all good. I'm a big fan of that. And I would say when I lived in the north of England as well, there were people who did that in the same way you see here in Ireland, as a kind of, sticking it to the American consumerism. And again, fair play, all good. But again, they're both fun traditions. And I think it's important to acknowledge, too, that even though some of these things don't necessarily have huge sort of, I'll say, ties, if you like, to antiquity, modern belief systems have evolved to kind of give them that kind of, if you like, backstory. And that's cool, too. So I think you also have to kind of respect those things. And I would encourage people to go off and read a lot of Ronald Hutton. There are some really fun things there to unpack. But long story short, turnips were around, they were practical. Then pumpkins were around, they were practical. So that's how they all get tied up with Halloween, sort of harvest time, related-ish festivals. And there's always a little bit of an element of divination, or we'll say mischief, if you like, tied up in these things. And I think that's important to remember, that there's always been an element of fun, even with kind of the more religious aspect of it. So I know I've not gotten into the brewing part yet. We'll get to that, but wanted to set the scene first.
And I actually did see one of my neighbors here in Stony Batter had some carved turnips outside
wonderful.
This past weekend. And when I lived in England, I noticed Mischief Night and Bonfire Night, which are also around this same time as Halloween. So
you also get... Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I think it's safe to say that the Beer Ladies podcast ladies all love Halloween and autumn and pumpkin beer. So it's probably one of our favorite times of year. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the important thing is, even if we don't all sort of ascribe to a particular belief around any of the sort of origins or all the rest of it, I have an excuse to dress up. I have an excuse to wear my little pumpkin and ghost hair clips. We get to drink pumpkin beer. I am all for it. And I would say I'd love to bring back some of the divination games. There's some really fun things there.
Oh,
So.
okay. Good to know. Now, Bean, would you have any advice for someone who would like to grow something like pumpkins or turnips in their garden, or perhaps where in the world this would be possible?
Well, I mean, sure. If you want to carve a pumpkin or a turnip and you want to do it from scratch and you've got 100 days for a pumpkin or 60 days for a turnip, then, I say go for it. Plant them out in May or June.
Okay.
And then I'll link a couple of nice little podcasts, including last year's The Plant Report with the Winter Squash Fan Club, and
Ooh.
you can totally gardener's question time out on that. Yeah, you can use even if you don't happen to grow your own, you can still use the whole pumpkin. You can carve it, and then you can toast up the seeds. There are some kinds of pumpkins that are actually hullless and grown as snacks, like they're particular kinds. But you can make a soup, or you can there are sweeter kinds. There are like little really orange ones or different colored ones that are really good for a pie. And then those great big ones that you see that are like the prize winning heaviest pumpkin that are kind of for carving. But you can still, one of my friends made this really nice like autumn glory pumpkin roasted centerpiece. It was a whole thing, and use the pumpkin as like kind of the bowl for a bunch of chopped up roasted autumn vegetables, and it was really nice. And I suppose we must have pretended we were mumming from house to house trick-or-treating as college age children. But yeah, do you guys have any questions about like sowing in modules or sowing direct? I don't think it really matters with turnips and maybe orangey yellow Swedes quite as much as pumpkins. If you want them to grow, give them really, really rich. They're pretty heavy feeders, and you'd want like 20 foot of space for some of them to vine out. Okay. So you may just want to wait till the weather's warm and then direct seed them, because they'll probably just languish until the weather gets really warm, and then they really decide, okay, we're gonna go. Otherwise, they'll just either sit there and rot or sit there and be like, oh, I don't know, it's not really warm enough. And then they'll take 100 days to mature. So, but they store so well so that after you have them for decoration, you can have them for food.
Very good. Yeah. And do you think
are amazing?
Is there room for importing them in areas where they're not able to grow them, or have you heard of that? Or
oh, why not? Because they store so well, you can import the fruits very happily.
Sure. Yeah.
And if you were really stuck for 100 days for a pumpkin, or 5 or 6 weeks for a turnip, you could sow in modules, and you could try and bring them on a little bit quicker if you were really, really stuck, for that amount of growing time. But
sure.
Yeah, I think if you can get away with it, see if you can plant direct in a big, nice pile of compost with some manure, and look, if they happen for you, they happen for you.
Yeah, my brother actually has a pumpkin patch, and I was in Minnesota a couple weeks ago, and we took a hay ride by tractor out there, and I think he'd had about 200 that had been picked, and about 200 yet to be picked. And the kids, my niece and nephew, were growing giant pumpkins, which can be taken to the state fair, and you get ribbons for them. And they were very disappointed because they only weighed 50 pounds. And they would weigh 200 because that's what they said.
That's what they were going
maximum would
for.
be. Yeah.
And what did they feed them? Just like horse manure or
I
or
didn't
whatever?
I didn't even think to ask them, honestly. Yeah.
I've seen people put down like landscape fabric and then put the plugs of their, either plants for modules or maybe even direct seed right there, and then have like sandbags and just rows of just nearly like mounds and mounds of pumpkins.
Yeah, we tried it with landscape fabric one year, but we've never, I guess, lived anywhere where it was a really happy climate for them. We got some in Pennsylvania, never got any in Seattle. It was just too wet. So
but if you can find some like weird looking ones for edible purposes at any sort of farmer's market or shop or grocery store, and you can just like write a little face on them and then use them for pie or eating, it's absolutely dual purpose. And you could even try and roast or maybe save the seeds, but they do cross that the squash family, the cucurbits do really readily cross with one another, so you wouldn't necessarily get the same seeds because people just growing them in a field for selling the fruits of them, they probably wouldn't be trying to save seed that would grow the same again. So
and I think some of them can be volunteers as well, just coming up on their own, and I'm glad you mentioned using them for food, because I think in these days of sustainability, it's important to see that as an ingredient and not just something to be smashed.
That's fun too. And then somebody else might eat those too.
But I think there's definitely room in the Irish market for pumpkin pastas and pizza toppings and pancakes. And when I was in Colorado recently, I had pumpkin cream cheese and ice cream, and really like the sky's the limit. So it was nice to see, and I didn't get sick of it. But I was just going to talk a bit about pumpkin use in alcohol. It's been used in cider and cocktails as well as beer. I think Carolyn has a stout there. That's one of the common styles it can be used in, as well as a porter, which would be very similar. And then the other one you had there was a wheat beer. I think most commonly here we'd see them as an ale. And the pumpkin itself is an adjunct, which would be an ingredient that's outside of our main four from the purity law. So some adjuncts like your wheat or corn or rice would be used as cheaper kind of extra sources of carbohydrates. But others will be used for flavor, and that's where the pumpkin is used. And this can be canned, which would be kind of a puree form. It might be the fleshy bits, the meaty bits, pumpkin spice, and some of them add in maple syrup or kind of other warm sort of fall spices like vanilla, nutmeg, cinnamon, etc., possibly clove. So if it's pumpkin itself, that would get baked and is usually added during the beginning of the boil. Whereas if you're using like the Trader Joe's spice, that would be added towards the very end of the boil. And I wanted to discuss possibly other kind of pumpkin adjacent ideas for new product development, because I haven't seen a lot of these, and maybe there's a reason why, but maybe sweet potatoes or yams, gourds, squash. I mean, there's so many kinds of squash that I would love to see in a beer. Not sure how it would smell or taste, but butternut squash, acorn squash, spaghetti squash. Do any of you have any ideas or thoughts or feelings about
I've had a yam beer before. They called it Oktoberfest, so it was umlaut included. The brewery in question. It was very interesting, actually, but again, it kind of harkens back to that original idea of, in this case, yes, it's more of an adjunct, like you say, but it did start off at least the early American ones. This is not a new thing. This is really from the 17th century. It was really, this was an easier way to get fermentable sugars than, having all malt. And, this was, just what you did instead of, malting it and then adding other things. Now, that's not the case these days, of course. It is, like you say, it's more of a flavoring, if indeed there is pumpkin in the brew at all, but because it may just be, like you say, sort of pumpkin spice or pumpkin adjacent. But I think it's a really interesting idea. What are other kind of related things that could offer maybe a similar flavor profile or maybe a related flavor profile? But the yam was interesting. And again, when you're thinking, from a sustainability point of view, what's regional, what's local to where you are, is there something that would kind of fill that niche? It's a really good question.
I feel like I heard last year that some breweries use butternut squash over pumpkin because it's like flavorful. I feel like I heard that last year, but I'm not sure if like I dreamed it or somebody said it and maybe it's not true. I don't know. So if anybody knows if they use butternut squash over pumpkin for pumpkin beers, let us know because that'd be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely the butternut squash and the acorn squash would be like better than your prize winning, more sugary and probably more delicious on their own than the prize winning carvable style of pumpkin.
Sure.
The vegetable spaghetti, the spaghetti squash would be, it's funny when you cook it, it kind of does come apart in these fibers like spaghetti and it's quite light yellow. And that would be so much milder and not as nutty and not as robust. With those sugars and those like beta carotenes that turn it really orange. And so that would be a different, more like a wheat ale style something potentially. But yeah, the butternut and the acorn and the little uchiki curry, Hokkaido squashes, all of those would be like a dark orange, really, really delicious kind. Yeah, so that would pack a lot of sugar in.
Also about that color and kind of that, that golden sort of clarity.
This ale is a good color. I mean, it's very light in color versus this other one that's kind of, I don't know, kind of like, it's not light in color. It looks a little, I don't want to say cloudy because I don't know if that's the right word, but that's what it looks like to me. It's just darker color, but cloudy. It's not as clear, I guess.
Hazy Oktoberfest.
Hazy. There you go. It's a good word.
And maybe we could make a throwback recipe that's like a turnip beer someday. So do some experimentation. Yes, we could do that.
Parsnips.
And actually, I have had a beer with parsnips, and there were other root vegetables too. I don't think turnips specifically, but again, it was the same brewery, and I'm not naming them because they're now on the bad list of one that's done bad things to people. So sorry, guys, no free publicity, but not in Ireland. So I'll just say that. But interesting things with ingredients. So maybe just try to do better by people. But that was a really interesting one. Was that the parsnip again? You didn't get. You didn't get a sort of vegetal flavor from it, but you did get a sort of earthy kind of character, and that was really interesting. So
I'd kind of like to see that for like a Burns night supper, sort of like end of January to pair with your whiskey, and you're eating the neeps anyway. So
and just to totally harp on storage, I actually think that makes a lot of sense because like those big fruits will be available at the middle or the end of winter.
Absolutely.
Still to use. So like it's very exciting to have like harvest come and have pumpkin ale right away. But like they only just are barely ripened, and we're gonna get them off the field and get them into the brewery and get them all mashed down and extract their sugars, ferment them. It almost makes more sense to have it after Yule.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think Go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was just going to say, especially here in Ireland, where the pumpkin beers tend to come later because, I think the growing season is a big piece of it. What if we did give them more time to mature and kind of get to, to be their best selves? Maybe we don't let them do that. So it's an interesting idea.
I recently read that some consumers were complaining about like Halloween items coming out too early and then running out before Halloween. And I was at a coffee shop yesterday that already had their Christmas flavors out, and it's too soon. And then they complain because there's this knock-on effect of the Christmas ones running out before Christmas. And I guess with Canada and the US, you know, we have that kind of buffer of Thanksgiving where these vegetables are still very much a part of our tradition, and you know, they're still being harvested. So I think it's down to the availability, really, and the demand.
Fair.
So with that in mind, would anyone like to offer any suggestions of where you might find pumpkin beer in Ireland or the US or in other countries?
I just remember I had a really good one in Seattle, and it was spicy, and it was a long time ago.
The Elysian
So
one,
I don't
maybe
remember
that's
what
Oh,
it was
yeah.
even called.
Yeah.
Is it an owl?
Night Owl. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and there's actually another one because when Elysian was bought by, I think, InBev, a lot of the people, the original people left because that's a thing that happens because beer. But a lot of them went over to Cloudburst, and they had sort of said, we're not going to make a pumpkin beer because that one had been so iconic. And then they finally made a pumpkin beer, and when they did, it was so good. And I think they called it something like Not Another Pumpkin Beer or something like that. But it was really, really just top-notch, really good stuff. It was sort of, you know, had started with that kind of base Elysian Night Owl, but kind of up a notch. It was just delightful.
I don't actually know how I would get pumpkin ale if it didn't come delivered to my door here.
Yeah, I feel like it is
in some of
here.
I looked in some of the shops, and there really wasn't, you know, in the kind of big main ones that I seem to frequent. Not so much.
Not many. I feel like you have to really watch the Instagrams like a hawk to know when things are coming, because I happen to get both the Trouble Brewing on tap at El Mulligan Grocer the other day. So yay, North Side, we've got all the good stuff. But I was very lucky too, because when they brought it out to me, they're like, you were the first person to have it on draft in Ireland this year. We've just cleaned the tap lines. And it was perfect. It was really, really wonderful. The Bald Eagle in Phibsborough has the Samhain on tap. So if you want to compare, contrast, but again, I feel there's this sort of accident of these are both near enough to me that I could, get them in the same weekend. So it's, very convenient, but I don't think it's the case for everything, and only happened to see it because they both posted on Instagram, hey, come get them. And, you can't always just be keeping an eye out. Everyone has lives and
totally.
So.
I happen to be going to the Big Romance this coming weekend, and I saw on Untappd that they have the White Hag Samhain on tap. So I'm looking forward to trying that, because last year was the first time I saw that batch, and of course all the pubs were closed. So
Right.
I don't think they even had many or any kegs of it. So did you have to do any pre-orders in the US, Carolyn, or how easy was it for you?
I walked into, I had to go to two different ones because one of them was pretty much out of the one off can. I don't like to buy 6-packs of stuff until I try it first. So I got one at one Total Wine, and then I had to go to another one this morning to grab the other one. But I feel like it's pretty readily available. I mean, I feel like if you walk into any grocery store or any liquor store or any like craft beer place, they're going to have a pumpkin beer, whether it be local or national.
Sure.
They'll have something.
And there's so many there. Yeah. I feel like people listening in North America are like, what are you talking about? There are thousands of them. It's like, well, I
feel like it's more readily available here, and you can go and pick it up pretty much anywhere to a certain extent.
I agree with your point about the multi-packs. I was going to off licenses in the US and found that a lot of the time I had to buy 4 or more cans, and I just like picking one can of this, one can of that. And I had a really nice one at the Rock Bottom Brewery in Denver. That was probably the nicest pumpkin beer I've had in a long while. And then I also I had a pumpkin cider at one of the tap houses
That sounds good.
in my hometown, and my stepdad and my husband really disliked it and ordered something else, but my mom really liked it, and that surprised me because I've never seen her drink a cider, and she finished almost the entire pint, and I was just really happy to see that because she loves pumpkin, and she didn't know that she would love pumpkin cider, and it was just by chance that she got to try it. So yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like pumpkin beer is hit or miss. Sometimes it tastes like a Yankee Candle, and other times like it tastes like a pumpkin pie. But that's with anything pumpkin. Like anything that has pumpkin in it. I mean, I know Trader Joe's has all their pumpkin stuff out. Like any pumpkin thing you get, you're either gonna love it, or you might think it's okay, or you might hate it. So I think it's iffy.
Yeah,
and it varies so much. Yeah.
Do you think that pumpkin in general or pumpkin beer is a polarizing food or drink?
I think people hate it because they blow it up so much, and everybody's like, pumpkin spice lattes are out in August. Like, what is going on, people?
But it's a good question, because I feel like the perception is that it's very, very polarizing, and I think it is because of that variability, because some just nail it, like just dial it in right at the right spot, and then others are, like you say, either the Yankee Candle kind of thing, where I think there even is now like that waxy kind of character to some that overdo it, and I don't know if it's just in your head because you're like, oh, it's like a candle, or if it is legit like the mouthfeel is in some way, not good. But even for ones that I know I typically love, and I'm thinking of some of the North American ones, like the one that comes to mind for me for that is Southern Tier Pumpkin, where some years it's glorious and it's imperial, so it's already strong, and you have to kind of be in the mood for it. But some years it's just so much that it's like, no, can't do it. Too many flavors all of at once, and other times it's just dead on perfect. And I think, but I think that's good too. You get that kind of variability of a natural product, and it's, you don't know what's going to happen necessarily when you mix it all up. And so that's kind of the fun of it too, is you hope it's good, but sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's great, and it's kind of the thrill of the chase too.
Yeah, and I think there was a barrel aged one when I was at Great Divide, and I don't really like barrel aged, but I had the regular one, and it didn't really have enough pumpkin in it, but it was much darker than I thought, and I think it is kind of hit or miss, maybe depending on that year.
Yeah.
So it could be an ingredient that is difficult to get consistency with, and
yeah, or like I always love the Dogfish Head Pumpkin Ale, which for years was the thing that would sort of herald autumn to me, because I would go and run the Dogfish Dash down there, and they would always give you that at the end of the race along with some of their other beers. But and that would be sort of late September timeline, and that to me they've always been really good about getting the right mix of kind of spices, and there is pumpkin in it, which again there isn't always, and I think that's. I don't think it's bad necessarily if it doesn't have pumpkin, but you want to know. I think, if that's the thing you're looking for, you just want to know, like, well, how did they make it? What was, what was the process? And I think especially the ones that do have a relationship with a specific farm or, a specific supplier, maybe it's just nice to see those connections. And, it's just good. Yeah.
I like to hear a story and maybe see the images on Instagram or Facebook, and I think it's Trouble, one of their mothers is the one that grows the pumpkins, and you kind of see like, oh, like she's planted them and they're growing and now they're picking them, and it is just really exciting, and I think we're all pretty passionate about it, but I'm sure there are people out there that would maybe thumb their nose at pumpkin beers altogether, which is fine because not all of us like every single style of beer.
Absolutely.
But that brings me to another question. Like, are there different kind of flavors of pumpkin beer that you prefer in terms of like sweetness or spiciness or combinations that you've found?
I don't want coffee.
Categorical.
No coffee.
No,
I'm pro chili.
Yes.
That would be interesting. Yeah.
Was that the New Belgium one that had was it jalapeno in it?
Oh,
That's Voodoo Ranger.
Yeah,
I did not get a chance to try that.
I don't know if that made it across the pond this year, but I know every year we expats are always trying to find
like sharks
the next one. Yeah.
circling the off licenses.
I do like the blend of pumpkin spice, but I don't want it in my face. Like I want to taste it, but I don't want it to overpower the beer. Like the Shipyard, this is my first time trying it. It's very good. Like it has the pumpkin spice in it. There's cinnamon in it, which I like cinnamon. Not everybody does, but like it still tastes like a beer.
Sure.
It's still drinking a beer. Just
Yeah.
it has a little bit of spice in it, and that's what I like. I like it to be like. I like to still be able to taste it, but still feel like I'm drinking a beer.
Yeah, I'm the same, and I think there's absolutely a place for kind of like pumpkin cocktail. Like I think that would be fascinating, but to me that's going to be a different thing.
Right.
And I would just like to have that, still be in the beer category. And I think that's one reason I really like this year's Trouble is it's really just, again, so beautifully balanced, has some of those spicy characteristics, but still very much like this is just such a good, solid, sort of pale ale that happens to have these additional flavors without being overpowering. So that's what I like to go for. I have had some good pumpkin porters in the past where again you had some of those spices but not overwhelming, and I like that. But I'm with you, Carolyn. I don't want the coffee in the mix. And,
I'm drinking the Harpoon Dunkin and I just taste mostly coffee. Like I don't really taste a lot of pumpkin, and obviously this is my personal opinion. Somebody's going to taste something completely different than I am.
Yeah.
Just don't come yell at me. I just feel like the coffee overpowers the pumpkin, and that's just my opinion. Somebody else could taste something completely different.
No, I think actually that the Trouble one I would love to have on cask. So again, would love to manifest more cask offerings into the world in Ireland in general. But I think it would actually be really interesting. I think it would bring out some of the flavors a little bit more. Again, not that they're not there, but I think it would be a really interesting way to just kind of get some roundness out of it. Just see what that's like. I think it would be beautiful. So again, just putting that out there. Cask, guys, would be good.
Just our own cask.
Hey,
I like your thinking, and I think the trouble every year is that it sells out so quickly.
Yes.
So blink and you miss it. And I actually was looking like a hawk on all the websites and ordered them as soon as I saw them, because I knew as soon as we got back to Ireland they would be sold out, and sure enough they were. So I think it's really cool that we have such a product here that so many people like and enjoy and look forward to every year. And it's such an oddity and it's unique, and that makes it that much more special that we have to wait for it. But like you were saying, I think it was like a pumpkin spice lip balm, and I really wanted to like it, but I didn't. And it can be very overpowering. So maybe some of the subtle ones are nicer. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions or comments before we sort of wrap things up? Or
I think just one thing about numbers is I wrote an article that we'll link to in the show notes on the history of pumpkin beer and going back to its sort of North American colonial roots and all that kind of thing. But I was just noticing that when I wrote the article, and this would have been back in I think about maybe 2008 or 2009, there were 400 pumpkin beers in North America. And I wonder how many there are now, even kind of post-COVID. Like, is that 4 figures? I really don't know. And we're here in Ireland, we have 2. So I just wonder like what that looks like in other places. And I wonder too about even over in the UK, I don't think they have that many. And obviously it's harder to grow here. Totally understandable from a supply chain perspective, but I do wonder, like, will we eventually start to get more, because it is something that people have this desire to get hold of this time of year.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. If anyone has that figure and wants to reach out on social media, please do update us. Yeah.
I just tried to do a quick Google search and I'm not finding it quickly.
Carolyn, did you have any interesting food pairings that you found?
For the Shipyard I'm drinking, it said spicy curry, mac and
Okay.
cheese, pork tenderloin, sweet potato quesadillas, which I'm really not sure how I feel about putting sweet potato in quesadillas, but
I'm not on board with that, but okay. Someone will be.
just because I live in Texas and I feel like that's like sacrilege. And then it says wings, but then I also looked at another article and they said like pecan pie, stuffed mushrooms, chicken and waffles, which I'm not sure if I want to be drinking like a heavy, like a pumpkin beer with chicken and waffles. Chili, apple pie. So I think like pumpkin ravioli. So I think anything like along,
That
I guess,
would be good.
I guess along the heartier foods, you're going to want to drink a pumpkin beer.
Yeah, I was thinking of maybe seeing if there's some, I think it's Libby's, the canned pumpkin puree, and making some blondies as like a dessert. I was tempted to bring over some treats, but didn't have room in my carry-on. But there are now like, instead of chocolate dipped pretzels, I think it's Flip's brand, they have like the pumpkin spice flavor, and they're much nicer than I ever anticipated. And the Werther's Original have a pumpkin spice, which is really, really nice. Yes, I thought I'd maybe try one or two, and I was blown away. So I think the expectations have been exceeded in that regard. So I hope we haven't bored anyone with our passion for this ingredient and flavor. But
I'm not bored. I would totally put that in a pierogi or vereniki or a dumpling or a pasta.
Oh yeah, that would be lovely.
Ravioli.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made a pumpkin risotto the other day.
Lovely.
That was interesting.
It
wasn't my favorite thing I made. It was good, but like I wish I would have eaten it like when I made it, not like reheated it.
Yeah.
You had me at mac and cheese, Carolyn. So.
Yes.
I mean, I love a good mac and cheese.
Well, I think that's about it for this week's episode. Just wanted to thank Bean and Lisa and Carolyn. This was actually my first ever time as the host, so you made my job very easy, and I really enjoyed this. Just a reminder to look us up on YouTube as well as wherever you find your podcast. And on social media, we can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And with that, if everyone wants to say cheers, I think we'll close it out.
Wonderful.
Bye,
Cheers.
guys.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.